Hi, my name is Romy. Welcome back to Start Pages. Today I'm going to be reviewing the Deathless Trilogy by Namina Forna. The first book, The Gilded Ones, the second book, The Merciless Ones, and the third book, The Eternal Ones. So this is going to be a spoiler-filled video because some of the details that I want to talk about are some of the issues that I found with the series. I can't really talk about them without giving away spoilers, especially since I'm going to be talking about all three books. So you're going to get spoilers either way. So the first book, The Gilded Ones, I'm going to just read the synopsis given on the book. A 16-year-old Decca lives in fear and anticipation of the blood ceremony that will determine whether she becomes a member of her village. Already different from everyone else because of her unnatural intuition, Decca prays for red blood so she can finally feel like she belongs. But on the day of the ceremony, her blood runs gold, the color of impurity, and Decca knows she will face a consequence worse than death. Then a mysterious woman comes to her with a choice: stay in the village and submit to her fate, or leave to fight for the emperor in an army of girls just like her. They are called Alaki, near immortals with rare gifts, and they are the only ones who can stop the empire's greatest threat. Knowing the dangers that lie ahead, yet yearning for acceptance, Decca decides to live the only life she's ever known. But as she journeys to the capital to train for the biggest battle of her life, she discovers the Great Walled City holds many surprises. Nothing and no one are quite what they seem to be, not even Decca herself. So this was my second time reading this book. I received and reviewed an advanced copy of this book prior to its release in 2020, so I was a part of a book tour for that. And I will link my original review, but my thoughts have changed just a bit. I reread the book in preparation for completing the series, so I needed the story to be fresh in my mind when I went on to the next book. My original rating for this book was 5 stars, and I really loved it when I initially read it, and the good vibe stayed with me up until when I picked it up the second time. And while I did enjoy the book a little bit this time around, I unfortunately did not love it the same way I enjoyed it the first time, and the issues that I decided to overlook in the first reading experience, which I did mention in the original review, really stood out to me in a negative way this time around. So my official rating, or my rating, has officially been bumped down to 3.5 stars, although I'm thinking of switching it to a 3-star because the longer I sit with my thoughts, the less positive thoughts I actually have for the book. So my first issue falls under world building, specifically the misogyny in this world. My problem with it is that it lacks any form of nuance. The misogyny in this book is depicted in such an extreme way, and at no point in the series did Forna give any sufficient explanation for why she went that route. The violence against women in this book is very gratuitous. It's very, very explicit, especially when you take into account that this is a YA book. And it seems very strange to me that we can have such vivid descriptions of torture that these girls are facing, but in the very same book, we skirt around the very idea of sexual intimacy. And I'm not saying that I'm begging for sex unpaid for YA books, or I'm begging for explicit sexual scenes in YA books. But I just think that the elements, or the way she described the violence and then romance and sexual intimacy, it doesn't feel like it's the same book or for the same audience. So the tone switching, it was a big issue for me. To shift to another aspect of my issue with the misogyny, let's talk about why I named this section of the video the way I did. So The Gilded Ones aims to tackle feminism in a very, very, very basic way, or female characters are going to earn basic respect that they should have as humans by being as big and as strong as the men who rule the world. So the movement, the feminism aspect of this book is very girl power focused. And in my opinion, it's a bit lazy to only show the very basic and sometimes not very helpful approach to feminism and liberation. And then even if I didn't take issue with the very simple girl power movement in this book, the way it was introduced in the story was quite ridiculous. So the segue from torture and accepting that you should be tortured or whatever to the girl power aspect happened very early into Decca's training montage, right? So the exact scene the shift happened was that I'm using natural light and then the sun. Anyway, it was that Decca noticed that the other Alaki are limiting themselves during training so that they don't show the boys that they are in fact stronger than them, right? Faster and stronger than them. And then in response, she gave this massive speech about how she's not a girl, she's a demon, and she's accepting that she's a demon and blah 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 blah. They're the ones who are going to save the empire, blah 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 blah. And then all the other girls in her group cheer and agree not to hold themselves back to make the boys feel better. But This was like 2 weeks after she was rescued from her village. And in her village, she suffered immensely. Like, she was murdered brutally numerous times, and she was tortured very heavily. And she was also very heavily indoctrinated. Like, she fully believed that she deserved all of this, even though she was in pain. She was sad that she was treated this way, but she believed that she was a monster, that she deserved the torture, that she hopes them kill her, blah 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 blah. And then she goes to train 2 weeks later, and she's like, oh, I'm a demon and I'm proud of it, and everybody should be proud of it, and these boys can't do anything like me, da 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 da. You can't be serious. Like, going from her wholeheartedly believing the religious teaching that stated women were below men, and that Alaki were even worse, that they weren't even human, and then she's shouting it all in front of these boys that, oh, I'm a demon, I love myself, I love my gold blood, whatever, we're the saviors of the world, blah 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 blah. There was absolutely no deconstructing done before Decca made this grand announcement and encouraged the other girls to do the same. And it didn't make any sense. It really didn't. So, moving away from the misogyny, but still world building, we're told that this story is African inspired, but to me it's very vague. And then also there's a multicultural aspect to the people in this book. So, like, the people are separated cardinally, and we know that the difference about where they're from based on their skin color, right? What I'm still wondering, I finished the trilogy and I'm still wondering if all of these people are based on different African cultures, like different countries in the continent of Africa, or are the other, like, directions on the map, are the other people based on other races or cultures? And then, like, even like Decca's people, like her very small village, the only thing I remember her, like, Forna talking about is like the baobab trees or something, and then nothing else felt very continent of Africa. You know, I didn't see anything. And then one more negative thing for the Gilded Ones before we go on to give praise where praise is due, right? And this issue spans the entirety of the trilogy, so I'm going to be mentioning it a few times, but giving different details in each section, or why it was such a big thing in each book. The romance in this book, or in the series overall, was very, very weak, and is compulsory romanticism a thing? You know, like compulsory, like compulsory heterosexuality, where heterosexuality is expected and forced upon the population by the powers that be, or societal expectation, blah 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 blah. But in this book, it's not that everybody's expected to be straight. It's that everybody's expected to end up in a romantic relationship, and it felt very 2014, like, you know, at the end of the day, the whole friend group, everybody pair up, and if they don't pair up in the friend group, then find somebody else that then bringing into the friend group to be in a relationship. And I thought we left that in 2016 at the latest, right? So the way it was done, I feel like the only reason Namina Forna decided to pair the Alaki up with male soldiers in the beginning, like they had their brothers in arms, like the Jatu. The only reason she did that, it became very obvious that the only reason she did that was so that most of the Alaki could later on go on to date these men, right? And then not only that, right? In the first book, my issue is mainly with Decca and Kita, or I don't even know how you pronounce that, but I'm going to say Kita. The romance was very weak, and it went from, just like how it went from Decca fully believing the religion to accepting that she's a demon or whatever, it went from like heavy distrust between Decca and Kita to overwhelming attraction. And I got whiplash, because where did this come from, right? But let's break up the negativity with something positive. I love the cast of characters in this book. I love Decca and her friends mostly. I love their friendship, and I hope we get to see, I had hoped we got to see more development in the friendship. We didn't, but we'll get there when we get there. I love how Decca's powers were described in this book and how we followed her along while learning how to control them. Unfortunately, that did not carry on through the rest of the series, but moving on. Also, I love the relationship between Decca and her pet, this creature whose name I completely forgot. And I found the backstory, or the creation of the Death Shrieks, you know, the biggest threat to the Empire that they mentioned in the blurb. I found that to be interesting. And then finally, I love the speech that Belcalis, one of the characters in the book, gave Decca about not forgiving the violence done to you, no matter what gifts they promise you. Because the reason they brought the Alaki to fight for them, or the way they got the Alaki to agree with them, is that after they fight a certain amount of years, they would be like accepted back into society or something. I don't remember exactly how they promised them that they would be accepted, but whatever. So violence, like she basically said that violence altered you in a way that cannot be erased no matter what they promised to give you, right? So big up to that. Next, we're going to be talking about the Merciless One. It's been 6 months since Decca freed the goddesses in the ancient kingdom of Otera and discovered who she really is. But war is being waged across the kingdom and the real battle has only just begun. For there is a dark force growing in Otera, a merciless power that Decca and her army must stop. Yet hidden secrets threaten to destroy everything Decca has known. And with her own gifts changing, Decca must discover if she holds the key to saving Otera or if she is its greatest threat. Right? So when I finished this book, I wasn't sure what rating I was going to give it, but I've settled on 2.5 stars because, yeah, it was... Anyway, in the Merciless Ones is where we really get to see the compulsory romanticism become an issue. Almost every single Alaki in the main friend group got paired off with their Jatu partners, so the overall character work of the characters in the friend group, the character development and everything she put into them in the first book, it really suffered in the second book because she started to focus on proving that they were so happy with their partners in this book, proving that romance is something very important that they need. And I wasn't vibing. Like, I am a hopeless romantic. I will admit that sometimes I can hate a book, but I will give it an extra star or half a star if I love the romance, right? But I wasn't vibing. I didn't like it in this one. And then another thing is, this is where we're talking about Decca and Kita again, but also Decca and her best friend Britta. So Namina Forna seemed very interested in writing a soulmate level friendship between Britta and Decca. But somewhere along the way, it started to feel more romantic than the relationship between Decca and Kita, right? And I was thinking, okay, maybe she's going to realize that what she feels for Kita is nothing compared to what she feels for Britta, and they're both going to break up with their boyfriends and get together. They didn't. They didn't. I was left trying and failing to believe that this supposed earth-shaking connection between Decca and Kita was real. Like, she basically brought this man from the dead with her love. But I wasn't seeing the love. So, waste of my time. And then, okay, so not every Alaki got paired off with the Jatu. This is why I said it was compulsory romanticism and not heterosexuality. Because some of them were queer. You know, there was male and female romances, right? And then one character, Belle Callis, she didn't seem to be interested in romance at all, which I loved, right? And then I did appreciate the queer inclusion. However, Forna started introducing non-binary and trans characters, or clarifying that characters Decca met in the first book who she assumed was cis or were cis and very gender conforming or whatever in the first book were actually non-binary or trans. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that I hated the inclusion of characters under the trans umbrella, but I think the way it was done was a bit awkward. It started off awkward in the Merciless Ones and then it got plain weird in the Eternal Ones, but we're gonna get to that. So first of all, it seems that Forna had no intention of writing trans characters in this series at all based on the first book, right? So I see no reason that the non-binary characters that we learned were non-binary in the second book couldn't have been introduced as non-binary in the first book, right? It could have worked if Forna took the route of Decca not knowing that this identity existed and then learned about it during the plot of the Merciless Ones. But that's not what happened. Like in Decca's internal dialogue, we learned that she always knew about these type of people, but like they weren't accepted in the world, just like they were worse than women, because like men can't date men because they're supposed to have children with the subjugated women, blah 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 blah, and if you're not a man or a woman, then you don't fit in, da 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 da. And I'm like, okay, but why didn't she mention, like, it just seemed very, oh, let me add this scene in the second book. I didn't like it. And then not only that, this also happened in the Merciless Ones, and it happened like almost every chapter in the Eternal Ones. Almost every non-binary character in this book was introduced as clearly not male or female, or looked both male and female, so they were very obviously non-binary. And it made it seem like non-binary people were always androgynous and can always be put out from the crown just based on the way they look, neither fit male nor female, or both male and female. And I understand that not everything about the world can be included in the first book, but it just rubbed me the wrong way that like there was actually absolutely no hint of it in the first book. And then, no, listen, this is where I might start to get a bit mean, but I don't care. So I don't know which spirit of an incel or a trad wife possessed Namina Forna periodically as she wrote and edited this book, but I feel like we need to sort it out in the boxing ring, because what the hell? So we learn in this book that the reason misogyny existed, or the reason the men decided to be so extremely misogynistic, was because the goddesses and the women were mean to the men first. Like, are you serious? She can't be serious, right? I mean, she is, because she published this and then the next one. But like, so we learned that the goddesses, when they were in charge, they only saw their female offspring as worthy. They didn't accept their non-binary offspring. They didn't accept anybody who identified both male and female, and they didn't like them. They didn't like their male offspring, right? And I think this is very unfortunate that is the route Namina Forna decided to go. Because in this series, Namina Forna uses a lot of issues from our world without taking the time to really work out how they fit into this world. For example, racism, colorism, sexism, misogyny, and homophobia. So like, apparently the goddesses were against not specifically female romance, but like the goddesses didn't like males, and they didn't like male romance. I didn't like non-binary characters or trans. They didn't like non-binary characters or children because they needed to be either female to be accepted or male to be rejected. But if they were trans, like they were male to female, then they were accepted. So it was a weird, a very specific type of homophobia, transphobia, whatever. And then, so due to the fact that she didn't take a lot of time to work out how they fit into this world, the books struggle to tackle any of these issues brought up. I don't think it reflects well on her that she decided to have the cause of this very violent misogyny be a result of women's actions, right? Misogyny is a form of systematic oppression that affects the entire population. And I say entire population because not only, like, women obviously take the brunt of misogyny, but because of misogyny, men are expected to behave a certain way. That's why you have homophobe, like men can't be feminine, they're expected to take on certain jobs, blah blah blah. It affects the entire population, right? So to write this story where we follow a main character who goes through very graphic gender-based violence, like we see it happen time and time again, and then to give Decca the hope of an equal world, and then to tell her that actually the people who promise you the equal world, they're actually worse or just as bad as the other people because they did it first. Like, they hated men before men hated women. So the men are, in fact, like, basically what she's saying, like, there was a whole point where it's like, actually the men are the victim. And I'm like, huh? So it just felt like bullshit. It was just bullshit to me, and I really didn't like it. And then Forna did conclude the book with some kind of mix up where the male gods were mean first, even if I keep saying mean, like it's a very serious thing, but let me say what I'm saying, right? So we learn that in the pantheon, the male and the female goddesses exist together. Like, apparently they were one, like each of the gods and goddess, like each god was paired up with a goddess, and that was like one being. But then when they wanted to integrate into the human world, they were like, oh, the humans wouldn't understand us because we're not male or female. So they decided to split up into male and female gods and goddesses, right? And then we learned that the male gods, like the gods, they were the ones causing war and whatever. So they were terrible to humans first. The humans were the terrible ones first. And then the goddesses, they found out about it and punished the male gods, and then decided to be mean to the male humans, right? And then everybody got corrupted and something. And then whatever conversation Forna was intending to have about gender-based discrimination, I don't think it was done well. Like, I'm not gonna give any praise for that. Anyway. And then in the first book, I like Decca's powers. I like the way how the magic system was handled. Unfortunately, I never liked it in the second book because it was just such a drastic decrease in quality, in my opinion. Obviously. Decca kept getting new powers in very, like, everything. Like, this book was almost purely plot convenience. So Decca kept getting new powers in very convenient scenarios, and then either she mastered it immediately and with a snap of a finger, or she wouldn't be able to replicate it because obviously the plot didn't need it at the time. But then later on there would be this long drawn out scene dedicated to her deciding she actually needs to learn the power. And I'm like, come on. Or there was another version. There's another route that Forna took. She gets a new power in a very convenient scene, and then we never see it again. So what? I didn't like it. Also, there was some hints of technology. Like, we got some mentions of automatons and like powered wheelchairs and whatever, and I don't think it fits into the book because there was no other mention of technology, and it wasn't like you have technology powered by magic. It wasn't like that. They were just mentioned. We don't know how them happen. They weren't actually mentioned in the first book, but in the second book, one of the characters that we met in the first book has apparently been using an automaton this whole time to like create weapons or whatever. I just think it never makes sense. There was no mention of it before. There was no explanation of it in this book. So it just, it never, no. I feel like the longer I sit on this book or the trilogy in general, the more negative things I have to say and the less positive things I have to say. But continuing with the negative things, something that started to happen in this book and then happened a lot in the final book, The Eternal Ones, that I found really annoying, was that Decca kept repeating or recapping everything that happened. And at first I was going to brush it off because it's a sequel and there's a lot of time between publishing the first book, the second book, and the third book. So obviously the author wants to keep us up to date, doesn't want to read his stuff again, because some people don't like to reread before they continue the series, whatever. But then it just started becoming like, it just got ridiculous because not only was Decca recapping things that happened in the first book, she would be recapping things that happened in this book. Like in the Merciless Ones, chapter 10, she would say, oh, here's what happened in chapter 1. This happened. This is how they related to me. This is what they learned. This is this. I'm like, shut the fuck up. Shut up. Like, it got old really, really quickly, and then I had to sit through it in the next book. I didn't like it. But let me calm down and try to end this book, this section, on a positive note. The reason I gave this one 2.5 stars and not 2 stars was because it had some semi-decent action scenes. And I'm a sucker for action scenes. So, like, a nice, high energy. There were a couple scenes that were nice. Okay, some action scenes were nice. Moving on. Finally, The Eternal Ones. So, the synopsis says, mere weeks after confronting the Gilded Ones, the false being she once believed to be her family, Decca is on the hunt. In order to kill the gods whose ravenous competition for power is bleeding Otera dry, she must uncover the source of her divinity. But with her mortal body on the verge of ruin, Decca is running out of time to save herself and an empire that's tearing itself apart at the seams. When Decca's search leads her and her friends to the edge of the world as they know it, they discover an astonishing new realm, one that holds the key to Decca's past. It also illuminates a devastating decision she must soon make. Be reborn as a god, losing everyone she loves in the process, or bring about the end of the world. Right? I don't have a lot to say about the Eternal Ones because at this point I was done, and there wasn't like, okay, let me start talking about it. I gave this one 2 stars. The worst thing about the Eternal Ones, and I think the worst thing a book can be or do, is to be boring. And this book was overwhelmingly boring. Like this book had significantly less action scenes, which is what gave the Merciless Ones that half star, right? And then the few action scenes that we did get, it was either Decca watching other characters fight because her mortal body was decaying and she was able to move without using up her powers or being in extreme pain all the time, blah 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 blah. Or there were a few scenes where she was fighting but it didn't actually feel like she was fighting because her internal monologue was this long drawn out introspection and her power and who she fighting and her da 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 and da da da. Like, just fight, just take up a sword and kill somebody. Like, at this, I don't care what you're thinking. Like, come on. Sorry. And as I said, the recapping thing that we saw in the Merciless Ones, it also happened in this book. So you can imagine how tired I was. Also, Deckard still kept getting new powers in this book and mastering it only when the plot needed it. So in this book, Forna explored the women were bad first story element that she introduced in the second book. She elaborated a bit on why she decided to go this route. It's not like she took a pause, like, telling the story and said, oh, here's why I did it. But, you know, in the story, she was like, she had Deca, like, thinking about it and whatnot. But it didn't make it any better. It didn't make the choice any better. It became very clear that she made this choice so that Deca could go through these series of introspections where she would come to the conclusion that no one group should believe that they're inherently better than another, and that even if you were a victim, it doesn't give you the right to then go on to be violent against this other group of people, blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. I understand the message. I agree with the message. But I don't agree with the way she went about delivering the message. You know what I mean? And then also Deca was just annoying and stupid. Like, she was getting stupid real fast. Like, she wasn't like, when she was thinking, I'm like, okay, obviously. But also it felt like, for like, once again, I understand it's a YA book, but teenagers and children, they have a brain. Brains work. Like, their brains work, right? And it felt like Forna thought her audience was very stupid. Like, not only was Deca stupid, but she felt like, but if you like, Deca was stupid because she thought we were stupid. And I don't fuck with that. Anyway, then we had a bunch of random info dumps that were very convenient to the plot and they weren't even hinted at in the first two books. So, like, once again, it's something that, like, it didn't feel like she thought about this or she had this idea until she was writing the last book. So it didn't carry on through the whole trilogy. It felt very disconnected. A whole new pantheon of gods was introduced in the Eternal Ones. Obviously for plot convenience, because there's no other reason. And then the explanation for why they weren't mentioned in the first two books or why they couldn't help, it was very weak, it was very stupid. Basically, they had an agreement with Oteran gods that they can't cross into their territory. Okay. But then, like, let's say it was some instance where if gods make an agreement, it's like some worldly thing that they physically can't, such and such and such and such. But then, no, like, we had an instance where, like, one of the Oteran goddesses or demigods, or like one of the children of the Oteran goddesses, crossed over into this new realm in the pantheon of the new gods, and they were like, the new gods were like, oh, you can't be here, you're breaking the rules. And then they said, okay, because you would do that, we're going to break the rules for the exact same amount of time that you did. And then they send Deca back to the people, like, they use their power to transport Deca back to Otera. I'm like, that's all? Like, that's the big consequence of the agreement. They just do it back to you. That's it. And, like, there was also this long drawn out thing about how the Oteran gods and goddesses fighting was actually impacting the entire world, and it was damaging this realm of the new gods, right? But then the reason they can't interfere is because they would get tainted, just like the reason the gods and the goddesses were mean, and I keep saying mean, like the reason they were so terrible to the humans in their realm, like their country, Otera, was because they were tainted by evil and da 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 da. And then if these new gods got too close to them, they would be tainted too, and it would be a whole thing. It just felt like bullshit. Like it was just like, okay, Deca is the main character, she has to do everything. Bullshit. Yeah. So and then also there was this type of discussion about divinity and whatnot, like who is a god and how you become a god and da 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 da. It was interesting at first, but then it went on for so long that I didn't care, and then it kept happening and I got annoyed, right? So obviously you can tell, like, after the first book, I didn't have a good time. One positive thing in this book was the expanding done on Kita's characterization and his history. So basically we learned we learned in the first book that his entire family was killed by death streaks, right? It was kind of interesting, him going back to the place where they died, and him having to come to terms with like his family being like, he's actually accepting his emotions now, because before he had just basically cut himself off from the emotions regarding that situation. And he's facing his emotions, he's accepting that he has a new family, blah 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 blah. Interesting, right? Cool. But then this new family that he's accepting, this newfound family, I love a good found family, but this new found family that he accepted, in the end of this book, Namina Forna basically ended the book by saying, okay, everybody fuck off. Like, like the finale completely ruined it. I think I'm laughing, but it's actually very sad that she took the time to build these connections, to build this family, to build this group of friends, make them so close, and then either kill off, like she killed off half of them, and then the rest of them, she just scattered them about the place. And they didn't even care that they were scattered. Like, everybody was, like, so happy. And people getting married. And such and such and such. And they were like, some of them were together. But all the people who were alive, they weren't together. Some people gone here. So some people gone here. So I'm like, really? Like, I didn't like it. I didn't like it. And then something that ties both the found family and the divinity together. After Decca becomes a god, or a goddess, or whatever, and she defeats the Oteran gods and goddesses, and she fixes all the damage done to Otera and this new world that she creates. Basically, she's like, I don't want to break up with my man, so I'm going to make him a god. And she gives her friends the options to become gods too. Some of them were like, no, I don't want to become a god, I want to live like a human life and get married and have children and die. And then some of them were like, oh, I'm pissed off at you because my sister died and it's like you didn't save her, so I don't want to talk to you and I'm done with gods and goddesses, blah 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 blah. And so if a god all I'm thinking at this point is that if a god had the power to make humans gods too, couldn't these, like let's say, like, the goddesses didn't want anything to do with Decca, the gods didn't want anything to do with Decca, right? So obviously they wouldn't do anything. But this new pantheon of gods, since they couldn't help by going to Otera and fighting directly, couldn't they have given Decca like some new powers? Like, one of the main reasons she was struggling in this book, or one of the main reasons we didn't get fight scenes in this book, is because Decca, she was given a mortal body, but her power is too much for the body, right? So it's decaying, and the thing that she needs to find is some drop of power, whatever, which would make her a full god, because we find out that Decca was actually like a piece of this one god who didn't separate. Like, remember when I said that the gods and the goddesses separated into male and female so that they could blend into humans? One god decided that they weren't going to separate, and they just stayed back and watched everything happen, and they were called a singular. We discovered that Decca is the singular, right? And she needs to find this one piece of divinity to go back to being the singular, right? But she couldn't walk, she couldn't touch people because she was in so much pain. So that's why she wasn't fighting, or when she did fight, her power was very low, blah 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 blah. Couldn't the other gods like help her? Like, if she had the power to turn Kita and whoever, White Hands, I didn't talk about White Hands, you don't need to know who White Hands is. Actually, I'm going to talk about White Hands after this. She turned Kita and White Hands into gods, and they become like her god friends. Couldn't these new gods and goddesses do something for her? They couldn't, like, even if they couldn't fix her body, they couldn't just give her a little oomph or something to help her if they really wanted to save the world. At this point, everything is just bullshit. It's just bullshit. It's bad. It's just bad. So let's talk about White Hands. So remember how I said that the way they talk about non-binary characters in the second book was awkward, and then in the third book it was weird? So basically we find out that White Hands, who was the first child of the goddesses, she is either gender fluid or intersex or something like that, right? But the goddesses didn't like that, because if she was both male and female, they couldn't accept every part of her. So she decided to just embrace the female side and forget about the male side. But then with Decca, she accepted that she was both male, female, blah 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 blah. So we learn White Hands is not female, like White Hands is gender fluid or whatever. But then the other characters, like in the Eternal Ones, it was every other page we're getting introduced to new non-binary characters, and once again Decca is describing them like, oh, obviously not male or female, da 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 da. And at a certain point, I'm all for queer included. Like, queer people exist and they should just be in the story. Like, I am the queer people. But anyway, at a certain point, it got to where it felt like Namina Forna was just in it for diversity and not actually for inclusion of these types of characters or these characters, right? Everywhere we went, it was like I would see somebody new, and then she would say, oh, they're actually non-binary, oh, they use they them, oh, da 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 da, and it just kept adding on. But the thing is, the characters weren't actually very important, and if they were important, it was like a last minute addition to saying, oh, actually they're not female. Like, I don't know if you understand what I'm saying, but it was weird. It was just weird. Anyway, that's all I have to say. So I'm not a scholar on anything like feminist theory or feminist literature or gender theory. Like, I'm not any type of scholar in these topics, so obviously I can say something and it might be incorrect, but these are just my opinions. But if I said anything that you know is incorrect, feel free to discuss it with me in the comments, or if you have anything to add, feel free to discuss it with me in the comments. Or if you liked every single book in this series, in this trilogy, tell me why in the comments. Let's have a discussion, let's talk regarding liking, commenting, and subscribing. Do what you want. Bye.